Hi, everyone. My name is Les Velez, and welcome to the Opus interview series. Opus, the Organization for Paranormal Understanding and Support, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 1994. Our mission, simply put, is to help people having paranormal experiences. I'm the co-founder and chairman, and for more information on Opus, please go to our website at opusnetwork.org. I'm very happy and honored today to have Richard Lang with me. Richard is a ufologist, a researcher, an investigator, author, and speaker. Formerly FAA licensed, or still an FAA licensed commercial pilot with an instrument multi-engine rating and a Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical Studies from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Florida. Mr. Lang enjoyed a successful career with more than 20 years in the corporate world as a senior vice president, working in brokerage and the trust investment division of commercial banks. In the post 9/11 period, he temporarily left his banking career to serve as a special deputy with the U.S. Marshal Service. He worked with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security as a federal liaison, interfacing with airlines and airport authorities responsible for implementing federal procedures, dealing with regulatory initiatives associated with aviation security and law enforcement agencies in Virginia that respond to airport and aviation emergencies. He was a member of the Anti-Terrorist Advisory Council Board organized by the U.S. Attorney's Office and frequently served as a key speaker on terrorism at quarterly regional meetings. He belonged to the UFO organization known as MUFON and went through their training program to become a certified field investigator and eventually was appointed as chief investigator for both Virginia and North Carolina. In 2008, he was showcased as the lead investigator in a Discovery Channel TV series, UFOs Over Earth. In 2009, Richard managed the BASS-MUFON SIP project and the STAR team, which at the time was the most advanced funded rapid response UFO investigative team in the world. In 2012 and 2013, he was featured as the lead investigator in the Discovery Channel Canada TV series Close Encounters, Season 1 and 2. He is the author of 2 books on the subject of UFOs based on 30 years of research and investigation. His first book was The Methodology for a New Age. His second book, The Age of Disclosure, Declassification and Disclosure, What the Government Knows About UFOs. Oh my God, Rich, thank you for being here today.
Good morning.
I tell you, what a background you have there.
Thank you.
Oh, it's incredible. But as we talked before we got on here, I would really like to understand a little bit more about the combination, the BASS-MUFON situation, and how that all kind of came about, and what was the result of it.
All right. Well, essentially, what happened is, and some of this stuff was done behind the scenes. And I'll tell you what I knew then, and of course, what I know now is a little different. But essentially, what was going on is the Defense Intelligence Agency was looking to put together a study about the whole, UFO unidentified phenomena arena. And what they did is essentially they got in touch with Robert Bigelow, who was owner and operator of Bigelow Aerospace, along with Henry Reed, and essentially they created a group that was the BASS group. And that was really a sister organization to Bigelow, and it was designed to be the receptor for the money that was going to be allocated for the study. So once the money was allocated, MUFON, BASS had got in touch with MUFON. And essentially what they wanted to do is put together an agreement where they would look at case reports and then investigate them, and then whatever happened after that, as far as the investigations developed. So I was part of the original project team when we were kind of putting the thing together. And basically what we did was we wanted to run it like a business. So we put it out an advisory and said that we were going to hire investigators to work on the project. And people would apply for typically they would be field investigators that were already established with MUFON. And what we wanted to do is develop a team of people with a good geographic pattern, so that, you don't want to be deploying somebody out of California to work on something in New York City.
Right.
So we ended up with about 50 people that were qualified as investigators, and they were part of the team. We call, it was the STAR team. And those people, their applications were processed and everything, and we basically started to operate the program. Well, when the program initially got underway, Bigelow BASS was paying MUFON for information. And that was something that was a little bit misunderstood. And basically what the agreement was BASS was paying MUFON for information coming out of the database. And so what it was kind of like a purchase agreement for information. And the reason why that I'll explain why that was a little bit complicated for some people in a minute. But basically what they were doing is we put together a team. I had, I think there were 12 dispatchers, and basically those people were working on a 24/7 basis. So somebody was always on duty, and they were always going through the CMS database. And when a new case would come in, they would look at the case, verify the contact information, sometimes even qualify by calling the person and get more information. And also they'd weed out all the nutcases that were putting phony reports in. So bottom line is we get 800 reports a month, and they would probably find about 50 of them that were really good, high quality cases. And then once I'd get those, then I would deploy investigators to go out and work on some of those cases. So, a case came in, it was a good case, we liked it. I would send somebody, out to wherever it was, and they'd go interview the people. Well, then once they completed that process, they do the interviews, they send the reports back to me, I'd go through them. Sometimes there was more information I wanted to have in the report, and we had a pretty standardized format. So I would basically put together a very comprehensive report about that case. And then every Friday, I would sit down with the BASS team, and we'd go over the cases and talk about that. So basically,
let me jump in for a quick second and just ask you a question.
Go ahead.
When these cases were, when the person that was involved with the case, did they sign a release form that the information could be utilized by MUFON in any way they needed to?
Well, I mean, here's what we did. When we very first started the program, the guys at BASS, basically we did some amendments to the CMS system. And basically what we did is we inserted a question, like, you put your name and address and all that in there. Well, then there was a question that said, would you be receptive to having your information shared with a third party for investigative purposes? Yes or no? Okay. If you put yes, then BASS could have access to that. If you put no, then they couldn't see it. So that's how we handled that.
Okay.
And then, of course, once you'd go out and meet with someone and started the investigation, you'd have them sign the form. We have a form, a release form, and all that kind of stuff to sign.
Right.
And so essentially that's how it was patterned. Now, there's a couple of things really to talk about in there. One of them was everyone got paid. So we had a system. There was a person, I ran the project. There was another person that was like an operations manager that handled all the financial stuff and the travel arrangements and all that kind of thing. So essentially what we did is we had money for hotels and travel. All the investigators were issued a Visa card. And it was like one of those, I think they were done through, if I remember, through Walmart or somewhere. And so basically you got a Visa card. It was like a debit card. And if I deployed you to go somewhere, the operations manager would look at where you were going, and she'd get your plane tickets set up for you, make your airline reservations, make your hotel reservations, and pay for all that. And then they'd put money on your Visa account to pay for the hotel and your per diem and all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, you got paid $100 a day. So everybody, all their expenses were covered. All their travel was covered, their hotels were covered, their meals were covered, and they got $100 a day on top of it. So consider that most of us have been doing this all our life. That was a big deal because it was the first time anybody ever got paid.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was
cool. It was very cool. Yeah. And I basically ran the project, the parameters that we were using, and this is there's a couple of things that were a little misunderstood. First of all, when we were working with BASS, they were looking at advanced propulsion systems, and that was the purpose of the reports that we were looking for. So if we had a case that, say, for example, an object flew over a building and the automatic lighting system started going off and on, and the alarm started going off, or the HVA system blew up or something like that, where it had an effect on the ground, that's the kind of stuff we were looking for. Okay. So, if somebody reported, a case where the aliens landed in the front yard and they were jumping around on the roof and all that, we didn't care about it. Okay. I mean, I might've cared about it, but they didn't care about it.
Right.
So things like cattle mutilations, abductions, all that kind of stuff were really not what we were sorting for when we were looking for information. Now, with that said, if a case came up and say it was an abduction or it was some kind of a close encounter, or, if I wanted to investigate that, I could have it investigated and they'd pay for it, but they necessarily might not be interested in that information. But I was totally free to deploy investigators however I wanted. Nobody ever came to me and said, hey, don't look at that. Don't talk to that guy. Don't go down to that never happened with BASS. And so we were really free to do what we wanted, but we were trying to find the information they were looking for. So most of the cases that we worked on were where something had a close proximity to the ground, where it had some kind of effect on the ground. And that's again, it was because they were discovering advanced propulsion systems, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Now, the other thing I think that was a little misunderstood about the program was that when we were doing this, basically we had an agreement with those guys, and they were paying us for information. And so when we submitted, I would submit those reports every Friday. And the deal was that whatever they do with that was their business. In other words, they're saying that any research they did on their part, I called it behind the mirror on the other side of the mirror, because that's kind of how it was with them. But they could do whatever they wanted. And our deal was that if they discovered something, it was proprietary information as far as they were concerned, and they didn't have to share it back with me or anybody else. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, well, BASS did this and BASS did that. How come they didn't publish the report? That's because
that was the deal.
That was the deal. And a lot of people at MUFON didn't really understand that. But that's how it worked. And in all fairness, those guys were awesome to deal with. They were so professional, and everything that they were agreed to do and were supposed to do, they did it to the letter, and even there was times where I think if you look at that now, looking back on it, there was really two components to it. There was the non-classified side, which I ran. And then on the other side of the mirror, what they were doing over there at Bigelow Aerospace, that was classified. And so there was a non-classified and a classified component to it.
Yeah. And these are the things that are frustrating, because the fact that you would really like to know what the hell is going on the classified side. So
I had a security clearance when I worked for Homeland Security, but it wasn't active when I worked on this program, and it wasn't a part of a requirement or anything. But you understand that, like, if they're working on something and it's classified, they can't tell you about it because they've got an agreement. They'll go to jail if they do.
Right.
And so, I think they've tried to. There was times I'd ask them stuff and they go, "Look, Rich, we can't talk about that." At least they tell me I always felt like they were being honest with me instead of lying to me and trying to bullshit me about, feed me a phony story or something. But
right.
if I'd ask them something and they'd say, they just say, look, we can't talk about that.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, okay, I got it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but with that all said, that was a really awesome experience. I later learned, I think one of the important components too, is that there's a book that came out here, about a year ago, not even a year ago. It was written by Colin Kelleher and George Knapp.
Mm-hmm.
And basically
Skinwalkers at the Pentagon.
Yes. And I learned a few things in that book. one of the things I'll be eternally grateful for is they named me in the book, and they said all those reports and stuff that I was giving them every week were being looked at in the Pentagon, which I didn't sort of know that, but
Yeah,
I knew somebody was looking at them, but it was
right.
really, and they, you know, I mean, they commended me and said I did a really good job and provided quality work and all that. And I'll be eternally grateful for them for saying that, you know. But the basically I knew that the money wasn't Robert Bigelow's when I was running that project, but I knew that it was coming from somewhere else, but they weren't allowed to tell me, and nobody ever did tell me where it was. I thought it was one of the agencies, but
Three-letter agencies. Yeah.
yeah, we know in the book now the DIA is the one that did it,
Yeah.
that funded it.
Mhm.
And you know, I think having done this, I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and I've looked at like thousands of cases, and I've worked on hundreds of them. And one of the things I think that I took away from the Skinwalker book was that when sorry, when we were doing that work, we would start out and, you know, we'd go through the whole process, but then when the case was done, it was kind of done. And I think one of the things that I'm revising my book right now is that you really need to go back and look at those people 6 months or a year later, because there's some paranormal effects that occur that we weren't really tracking. And in the Skinwalker book, they talked about a lot of that stuff, you know, how that these guys had, you know, basically they were working on the ranch, and when they left, they went home, and they had a lot of really bizarre paranormal things that were happening in their own homes, that people call them hitchhikers. They followed them home.
Right.
And the research we were doing up to then, we weren't really tracking that, but I think that's something that really, you know, going forward, that's what I'm hoping, you know, I think that's an interesting component to the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where our organization comes in, because a lot of those people eventually find us
Yes.
and looking for help, whether it's, you know, a mental health practitioner or a hypnotherapist to better understand what's transpired if they can't remember it. But I was kind of curious about, you know, maybe you could talk to us about a couple of the cases that you worked on that you found to be really, really meaningful and interesting to you.
Well, when you read the book, the
Methodology.
no, the Skinwalker at the
Oh,
Pentagon.
yeah, you're right,
Yeah,
right.
there's a case in there about a guy that basically, you know, a huge triangle hovered over his property, and he went out and he shined a light up on it, and then he got burned from a beam of light that came down. That was one of the cases I personally worked on. So I went out there and did the initial interviews with that guy, and we videotaped him. I typically, if I'm working with somebody, if I can, I'll videotape the interview, because it's good. You can go back and look at it, and you know, there's a lot of reasons for. I've explained in my book. There's a lot of reasons for videotaping an interview. And what we did is I ran about 2 hours of video, and then I sent that back to the BASS team. And then they watched the video, and then they went out and reinvestigated the case. And a lot of the details about the case that they developed are in that book. And it was quite interesting. There was another case that's really famous that we worked on. It was in Port Jarvis, New York. And basically, there was a guy that he was a nurse practitioner in a mental health facility. It was around Christmas time. He's driving home. And he's driving home, and he gets this, he sees this light in the sky. You know, it's like rolling hills. And so every time he comes up on the top, he sees the light, and each time it gets closer and closer, you know. And so pretty soon it's pretty obvious and pretty prominent. So he pulls over in this pasture next to like a farm, and the thing comes right over his car. And he described it. It kind of looked like a big rotating triangle kind of thing, you know, like a rectangle, more like a fan blade almost. The pictures that we drew from, but irregardless what it looked like, when it got over the car, there was a point where the everything in the car goes out. The headlights go out, the dash lights go out. It's night. Phone's dead, car's dead, and he's sitting there in the car in the dark and dead. And the only thing he can do, he said he could hear a sound. It would sound like a cat purring.
Huh.
And so now at first he was curious, and now he's getting really scared. And so he's thinking, you know, should I run? Should I stay in the car? You know,
Right.
And the answer is always stay in the car. Don't get out of the car. Because if you get out of the car, the electrogravitic propulsion system, which creates a radiation, it'd be like sticking your head in a microwave oven.
Yeah.
It does tissue damage. So
wow, that's interesting. You always wonder about how that effect is working, and then the ramifications of it. Matter of fact, yeah, in my book too, I talk about the electromagnetic effects, and there's gamma rays, X-rays, a whole bunch of rays going on with these type of phenomena. But
well, what happened when this particular case is the car's dead, and he's pushing to unlock the door, and it was a brand new Mitsubishi, and everything, the electrical system's out, and he's trying to unlock so he finally manually gets the door to open, and he's still got his seatbelt on. He sticks his head out and looks up, and when he did that, it's gone. It's gone. And I said, well, did it fly away, or did the lights go out, or what happened? He goes, I don't know. I just want to get the hell out of there. He was scared. He's really scared.
Right.
And so after it was gone, everything in the car comes back on. In the most interesting, there's two interesting parts about this case. One is when the car came back on, I went up and interviewed this guy. I sent somebody up there to talk to him first, and then I went back a couple weeks later and interviewed him again. And I said, so you're sitting in the car, and all of a sudden the lights come back on and the motor starts up again. He goes, no. I said, what do you mean, no? He said, he goes, the motor didn't start. I said, you know how when you start it goes, and it starts. He goes, the motor didn't start. It was just running. I'm like, what? Tell me about that. He goes, okay, it was like watching a movie. You push the play button, and then you push the pause button. And then when you push the play button, everything's going again. He said the motor was running, but it didn't start again. And that's really interesting.
That is.
It's very interesting. And I was called by some of the old guys that have been around for 30 years doing this. And that's probably one of the most interesting cases. There's about 4 or 5 cases like that's occurred in the last 20, 30 years. But the motor was just running again. It didn't start. And so then you got to start thinking about what happened there. Well, I think what it is that they freeze the time. They freeze time.
Yeah, time dilation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Stop it and then start it again. But it's interesting because they dilate the time, but the individual's still moving around and walking. But when we went back to interview the guy, we did a lot of the car was like really had a huge electric field on it. Like when the investigator first went there, he walked up, he said he could hold his hand out about 8-10 inches away from the car, and you could feel the static cling on it, like when you open up a cleaner bag and there's a little sweater in there.
Right.
And so we did a lot of tests on it. It had a huge magnetic field on it. And what we did was it was a brand new car, and we had somebody look up the VIN number on it. And you know how dealers can locate cars, like when they're trying to sell them. So we did a locate on that car and found one that was built on the assembly line, like 3 or 4 cars back. And they were identical cars pretty much. So we sent a team out to do all the tests on the test car to make sure that there wasn't some kind of magnetic anomaly that was just weird on that car. And of course the test car was all negative. But we tested it, had a huge field on it. And then And we use the you know, the tri-field meters and all that, but a
Yeah.
good way to do that is you get a compass, and I had the graphics in the report, but you get a compass and get away from the car, so the car points north, or the compass points north. But then when you get near the car, the compass needle points to the car. And so then if you
Yeah.
walk around the car and record the readings on the compass, you can get a feel for where the field is and how strong it is and all that kind of stuff, which we did. So that was, you know, that was probably one of the most interesting cases, because there was a lot of physical evidence with it. The guy was not injured. He didn't have any missing time. He didn't have any health problems afterwards or anything like that. But it was pretty
Yeah.
cool case.
You know, and people talk about, you know, these things, they're there one second, and then the next second they're gone, you know, and it's like, is it a cloaking thing? Is it going into another dimension? Is it, I mean, this raises all kinds of questions with regard to, matter of fact, I had a case where very similar thing happened, where these objects were sitting there in a canyon, and all of a sudden they just, like, they went around a corner. It was described, but there was no corner to go around. It was like they went into a portal or another dimension.
Right.
These are all
Well,
fascinating.
the things that you know, in my book that I've talked about is, I wrote this book, and it's basically UFO investigation, the methodology for a new age. And the reason why is because, you know, for all these years, you know, guys are going out to these scenes, and, you know, they've got their magnetometers and their cameras and lenses and meters and all that stuff. And they're looking for physical evidence, which is great. But the problem is, a lot of this stuff is in, it's multidimensional, and it also has the time dilation aspect to it. Like, a lot of times you'll see someone, and you know, I interviewed this lady, and she was down in Petersburg, and there was a saucer type craft. She actually pulls off the road, and you know, she had 2 kids in the car, and the thing landed like in close to the car. And she said that when that happened, that everything was silent. You couldn't hear anything. And that's a lot of times when close encounters happen like that, people will say that, you know, everything got silent. And so what my question is sound is basically a time thing. You know, you've got so many oscillations per second creates a sound. But if you stop time, the oscillations stop and the sound stops. So one of the things I think is significant about that is when you see somebody talk about something getting silent, it's usually because there's some kind of a time dilation factor in there. And
That's
then,
interesting.
yeah. And the other thing is clear, you know, I mean, when you talk about other dimensions, I remember a few years back that project that's called CERN. It's in Switzerland and France, where they have the particle accelerator. They did a special on 60 Minutes about that place one time, and I'm sitting there watching the 60 Minutes show, and I'm thinking, you know what, these guys are looking at other dimensions outside our time space reality. I'm just thinking that in my mind, you know. And so after I kept listening, I said to my girlfriend at the time, these guys are exploring other dimensions. And she goes, you've had too much wine, you know? And then the best part, though, at the end of the show, the guy that was running it, he came on and he said, well, we've identified 12 dimensional realities outside this time space reality. So, you know, if you know, it's time to, you know, get up to speed here and start to listen to the quantum physics, because they have discovered other dimensions outside our reality. And it's obvious that these things can transition in and out of our time-space reality. I mean, they'll be there and all of a sudden, zap, they're gone. They disappear. Well, where'd they go? They went to another dimension. And that has to do with how the frequency and all that kind of stuff. I've talked about that in detail in my book. But, you know, basically, the people say, well, where do they come from? 3 answers. 1, they come from other planetary systems. And they can travel in ways that people say, well, it's 20 light years away. Yeah, by our technology, but theirs, they go through a wormhole. They can be here in 20 minutes. There's other time dimensions they come from, and they come from other dimensions. That's my answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
I've people have asked me that question. Are they extraterrestrial in nature? Are they interdimensional? Are they time travelers?
and the
Is it
answer
our
is all above. Yeah.
all? Yeah, it's all the above. It's
Right. Right.
all the
That's
above, and
exactly right.
probably anything you can possibly think of beyond that. Once you go down this rabbit hole, there's all kinds of possibilities. One of the things too that you talk about in your book and is consciousness, how that whole thing plays into this phenomena. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Mhm. Well, one of the things, my degree, my bachelor's degree is in aeronautics, and mostly that's physics and science and stuff like that. But I remember when I was in college, we had a professor that had just he was an Army Air Force colonel, and he'd retired from NASA, and he worked on all the Apollo projects, and then they were done. He retired, and I remember him talking about experiments they did with the astronauts, and basically, and some of them have since come forward and talked about this. I wrote about this in my book, but basically, what they did is they had people that would develop ESP rapports. So basically, you've got two guys and they're sitting at a table, and there's a board up here, so I can't see the cards on your side. And you look at these cards, and they've got X's and zeros and pluses and minuses and squares and triangles and stuff like that on them. And then you look at it, and I try to figure out what you're seeing. Well, if we do that and we get good at it, we practice at it, we can develop a very high rapport of accuracy by doing that. And several of the astronauts trained in those programs and developed very high accuracy rates with people that they work with on the ground. So the trick is like, okay, now you're in orbit, you're in the Apollo projects, you're out there flying around the moon, and at some particularly specific time, you're going to open up your packet, and you're going to look at the cards, and the guy on the ground's going to try to identify them. There was two things they learned from that. One, that the time, the space had the distance had no effect. Considering that, if you remember watching the Apollo projects, the astronaut would be talking, okay, Houston, concur, beep. And then 4 seconds later, you hear the other guy talking back, beep. Well, that beep is what's called an end of transmission. So when you let go of the button on the microphone, it beeps. And there's this 5 second delay because it takes a radio, light travels about the same speed as radio waves do. And so it takes about little more than 2 seconds for a radio signal to get from the Earth to the moon and then back again. So there's like always a 2.5 second delay on radio transmissions. Well, what they found out was that the freaky part was that the psychic communication is instantaneous. There's no delay. Think about that for a couple of years.
Yeah, here we go again with quantum physics. Being
Yeah,
able to.
So, the psychic, because somebody had said once to me, well, if somebody's like 10,000 light years away, and that they could, if they're communicating psychically, it's instant.
No,
So,
yeah, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
So in that respect, I think that a lot of the stuff that you see with abductees, I've learned a lot by dealing with them and talking to them, and you get to where you're hearing things from them that are coming through to you from ETs. It's like a kind of a third party communication, I guess you'd say. But a lot of that stuff about consciousness is, these people, when they have these experiences, their state of consciousness changes, in a lot of ways, and they communicate. And I think that what we're seeing in general is that human consciousness is going up to higher levels, and the internet's sort of like an electronic form of human consciousness, if you think about it that way.
It's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I dealing with as you said, abductees is really mind-blowing at times, and hearing what they're saying, but their worldview definitely changes after an
Yeah,
experience like this. You need to be better stewards of the planet. You need to be
right.
better to one another. You need to love one another, which is all positive, very positive type things. And like 70 to 80% of the people that are having experiences don't want them to stop. But then you
That's a
do,
good point. Yeah.
yeah, and there's that other, percentage that definitely wants it to stop because they're having very, very difficult times. What's your opinion about uh, maybe agendas that are going on with the aliens, if you will, if you want to use that terminology, or the non-human intelligences?
Well, they're clearly sentient, but first of all, if you go back and look, you can see paintings of flying saucers and pyramids and in all kinds of historic caves and stuff like that, ancient places. So there's nothing new to this. They've been coming around a long time. And I personally think there's probably at least maybe somewhere between a half a dozen and a dozen species that pretty much can come and go here whenever they want. And they all have different agendas for the most part.
Hmm.
People say, well, do you think they're going to, like, I think right now there's a lot of, I wrote about that in my book, but, a lot of people in the UFO world, I called it a false flag, but people are saying that the Defense Department agencies and stuff like that, they're going to try to, make it look like the ETs are dangerous. So then they can get Congress to allocate trillions more money to the defense contractors and stuff like that. That they're all in it, in business to make money.
Hmm.
I honestly don't, based on everything I've learned, I don't really think that they're here to harm us, honestly, because they have technology that's so far ahead of us. I mean, they could
They
they
could have
could
done
do
it
it. They
already.
could have trashed us in 2 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if they wanted to do it, they'd have done it by now. If that, makes sense. And I just don't get that feeling. Now, there have been people that have been injured. And
Hmm.
even with Bass, and I think they wrote about it in their book too, but basically there have been people injured when they have close encounters, but it's because somebody walked under a hovering craft or something like that, and it wasn't by deliberate intention. It's
Hmm.
like somebody getting in a car accident.
Right.
They didn't plan on it, but they just stepped out in the road at the wrong time. And I think they said that they didn't think that the occurrences that they investigated where someone was injured, that it was done deliberately. It was just by,
Hmm.
by accident.
Happenstance. Yeah.
Happened. Yeah. Yeah. Somebody,
Hmm.
in my book, and I'm working on a book right now for first responders, police,
Hmm.
and one of the things there's some things that you do and don't do when you get around this stuff. And one of them is, I wrote about it. You never put a high powered spotlight beam up on one, because that tends to end up badly usually. Don't walk underneath anything that's hovering, close proximity to the ground. Don't go up and touch something, because if you have a craft that's on the ground and it's still powered up, you'll have, sometimes people talk about a sheen on the skin of the craft or
Hmm.
the
Plasma. Hmm.
well, but what it does is there's a X radiation
Mm.
that comes off there. If you use a meter, it's in the X-ray spectrum, and it'll cause radiation sickness. There's not, and again, doing this a long time, there's not a whole lot of trace evidence of radiation on the ground. You'll get a lot of different types of electromagnetic fields and radio frequencies and EMFs kind of thing that will be, that are detectable, but there aren't a lot of radiation. There isn't a lot of where something landed and took off and then the ground's radioactive. That typically doesn't
Mhm.
happen. And,
Mm.
in my book, I tried to warn them that if you look in some of these old manuals where they teach people how to investigate, you probably, what I'm talking about. They used
Mhm.
to say to carry a bag of string and stakes around, and you go in, if there's something radioactive, you go in there and you put tent stakes down and stretch strings across and create a grid. And then you take radiation readings in each one of the grids. And it's like no, you know, first of all, if you get around anything radiation, you got to wear a complete hazmat suit with a respirator. You don't go tramping around in there in your tennis shoes if something's radioactive, you know.
True.
Yeah. But I mean, that's how things have evolved. But I mean, honestly, that really doesn't happen that often. But there are, you know, there's certain types of satellites that they actually have little nuclear reactors in them. And if something like that would actually crash, and that wreckage could be very hazardous, you know, you just, my thing is I have a radiation detector, and when it starts ticking, I start running, and that's the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I think, you know, people have asked me many times, you know, do you think they're all good or they're all bad? And I said, well, I think that, you know, what we're dealing with is variable. It's just like we have good people here and bad people here on this plane, this dimension. I think the same thing is going on up there, because they're, you know, the people that have had negative experiences. I mean, they've had some really horrendous experiences, you know, as far as being examined and probed and all of this stuff, which has left their mark on these people and
Yeah,
not
but
only
then
physically but
they
mentally.
still brought them back home and tucked them in bed, you know,
Well, yeah,
yeah, they could have dropped them
maybe.
off in the ocean somewhere, you
Well,
know.
that is true too. That
Yeah.
is true. You're right. You're right. But then you got people like David Paulides talking about the 411 things where people
Yep.
all of a sudden go missing and never return. So that's a whole
Yep.
nother ball game.
Some of those, I don't know Dave Paulides, but I've read a lot of his stuff and watched his videos. I think he's doing some really cool research. And the fact is, these people do disappear in the parks.
Yeah,
And the National Park Service apparently isn't real excited about telling people about that. But
exactly.
basically, don't go by yourself, and you know.
Mhm.
But yeah, usually that if you're in a group, that it's when someone strays away from their group is when they typically get something happens to them.
Right, right.
You know.
That's true. I want to go back to the discussion of Bass and
Mhm.
the program. Now, the people that you were dealing with, you said you've had a really good
Yep.
comfort level with them. Can you divulge some of their names as who was
Mhm.
you were working with, or was that something that was pretty secret?
Well, I don't know if it's secret or not. The guys, if when you the book that was published by those guys,
Hmm.
the Skinwalker and so forth,
Right,
they tell you right up front that they redacted some of those people's names and changed some of those names in
uh,
that book aren't the real names of those people.
right, right.
And
Okay.
I think they submitted that to the Pentagon for approval, and that was one of the conditions, that they wanted some of these agents' names redacted and stuff like that. And
Okay.
also, some of the cases that, like the case that I was talking about, they redacted the name and
Hmm.
also the location of it.
Hmm.
So generally, I mean, Colin Kelleher has
Hmm.
been pretty vocal in that he wrote books about it.
Right.
George Knapp, I
Hmm.
know both those guys. They're real stand-up, high credibility type people. George Knapp probably knows more about what's going on than anybody I've ever talked to in my life, and
He's a
he's an incredibly
uh,
great guy. He's credibility to the max. He's a wonderful person, and he's very smart, knows what's going on.
yeah. He actually I was on his show Coast to Coast with him talking about abductions, and
Yep.
I had one of the abductees with me that night, and we talked about her case. And no, I totally agree. He's a great guy.
He interviewed me twice this year on Coast to Coast, and then also I was on that Mystery Wire show of his too.
Mm,
And he's really cool to you know, interview with.
yeah.
But
Well,
the
so
guys that yeah, some of the guys that I knew there,
mhm,
um the a couple of them I was pretty close with, and you know, if somebody says to me, look, I've gone on to other things and I'm in the corporate world where I don't really want to have this,
yeah.
please don't give my name or my contact
Right.
information out, then I'm
Right.
not going to do it. And
Right.
I've had
Right.
people from Bass tell me that, so I don't do it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I totally respect that, and
Yeah.
not an issue at all. I was just curious because you know, there's a lot of names thrown around out there, the people being involved, like Eric Davis and Kid Green, and you know, Gary Nolan, people like
Well,
that.
let me just back up for a minute. The team, there was at BASS, there was a team of investigators, but there were also people that were consultants, like some of the guys you just mentioned that were involved with that too. When I wrote my book, the first book, I had been given some stuff that was published by Eric Davis and Jacques Vallée. And when I published the book, I wrote to them and asked them if I could use that in my book, and they both came back, and they were the emails are in the book, but basically they knew about the work I was doing with BASS, and they were very gracious and let me use that information. It had to do with more the different states of when you're dealing with this stuff, there's like, they call them layers, but basically you start out and you've got the physical layer where, like, anything that's associated with the case, you can photograph, it'll show up on radar, it makes sounds, if it lands on the ground it makes marks, normal physical type stuff, and you can see it. But then they refer to what they call the anti-physical, when, again, I listed all that in my book, but this is the stuff where it might not show up on radar, it might not show up in a camera, things that that objects will converge into one, or it'll split up and break up into two, they'll disappear and reappear, those kind of things, the anti-physical things, the things that just don't compute with our physics the way we know them. And a lot of this phenomena takes place in that realm. And so, in the book, that's partly what I was trying to do is teach investigators about the anti-physical effects and about the consciousness and the multidimensional aspects of these cases. Because the only way I can give you an example is this. Okay, you've got somebody and there's a report, and somebody was sitting in a car, and a craft basically comes along, and it comes right down through the trees in the forest, goes right through a chain link fence, and lands in front of the car. Okay. So the investigator, he goes out and talks to him and everything. He writes his report up, and he says, yeah, the thing flew over the trees, it flew over the fence, and it landed in front of the car, because he knew what they said is impossible. So he reported it based on his perception of reality, which is the wrong answer. Okay. Because that phenomena does happen. And you have to make sure these people understand, when somebody says it went through a wall or went through a chain, or I was abducted, they took me right up through the roof of my house. No, they didn't sneak around and pull you through the window. They took you up through the roof of the house. And that's how you need to write the report. And, whether you like it or not, or believe it or not, you write the report based on the information that's been given to you. And then that way you create a reliable database. It's just like, you've got this. One of the things I used to notice was, like, somebody would say, I was out there walking my dog at 2 o'clock in the morning, or I was out on the porch smoking a cigarette at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I saw this light, and it was at great distance and high altitude. And I started watching it, and the more I watched it, I started to get the feeling that it was somehow aware of my, it could tell that I was in connection with it. And then the next thing you know, the thing comes and flies right over me, because it could hear my thoughts, or it was aware of my thoughts. And you think, okay, you read that report and you go, that's a little strange. I don't know about that. But then you go back and, like, where I've done this, you read 100 more reports where the people said the exact same thing. It's like, okay, maybe there's something to this. You see what I'm saying? So sometimes you validate things just because that so many people have said it I mean, there's literally 100 reports out there where people use that exact same language. You could read my thoughts or anticipate my thoughts.
Right.
But the first time you see
capabilities,
you see that, and it sounds a little weird, but once you see it over and over in the data again, then you know that that's something going on, if that makes sense.
For sure. Well, I think we're almost at the end of our little session here, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your book, and how people can get your book.
Let me do that. I'm going to put up. If I can get my
Yep.
background up here on the screen, I'll try that. See if I can
Okay.
do it. There we go. And
Perfect.
there you go. Can you see them? Yeah.
Yep. Oh, perfect. That's
Okay.
absolutely perfect.
Yeah. So basically, I have 2 books out. We've talked about them. If you just go on my website, Lang Publication, there's links to buy them. They're available on Amazon. You can get them in the Kindle edition, or you can get them in the paperback or hardcover. You know, like you can get them like that if you want.
Yep. Fantastic.
And that's the way to, if you want to buy them, that's how you get them. And I'm
we're
working.
gonna. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, I've got another book. There's 2 books I'm working on. One is consider that these books that I've written, the first book, the investigation book, I've given that to a lot of my friends that aren't really into this stuff. And although they might find it interesting, they'll come back and tell me it's like a little too complicated or complex. So then I wrote the second book, which is basically about disclosure, and it was a little more geared towards the public in general and not so technical. The third one I'm working on, about half through with it, it's just a book of short stories. It's really fun. You know, it's kind of like 25 episodes of the X-Files, where it's just basically cases I've worked on, but it's told in a format where it's kind of like we're sitting around the dinner table and you know what happened to me last month, and I just tell it like that. And then I'm also got another book that we're working on for first responders too, but these 2 are out now and the other 2 are coming soon. Thanks for letting me do that.
That's fantastic. And what we're going to do also is we have a recommended reading section on our website, and we're going to put your books in there, and that directly ties to Amazon. So when a person clicks on the picture of your book, boom, that takes you right to Amazon.
Right. They're both in they're both in everybody's got that, so I'm gonna undo it.
Yeah.
Go back to my normal world. There you go. But thank you.
You bet. You bet. And the thing that I did not mention in the beginning in your bio is you are a brand new member of the Opus Advisory Board. So
yeah, and I'm very grateful and proud to be part of that too.
Thank you, Rich. I really appreciate you coming on board, and really appreciate our talk today. And I want to thank all of our listeners. And of course, Opus depends, as a nonprofit, we depend on donations. So if you happen to hit our site, opusnetwork.org, we'd appreciate you tapping that donation button and subscribing as well. So again, Rich, thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure.